They tried to sell the Apache sisters like cattle. A rancher stood up to them all and took them home. The sun had barely risen over the jagged peaks of the Apache lands when the sisters, little more than children in their teens, were already awake. The air was crisp and dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the soft rustle of the desert wind through the canyons. The eldest sister, Ahuli, moved quietly through the small clearing where they had built a temporary shelter, careful not to wake the younger ones. She had always taken the role of protector, watching over her sisters with a seriousness far beyond her years. Nakamis, the middle sister, still half asleep, tugged the blanket closer around her shoulders, while the youngest, Mika, yawned and rubbed her eyes, her small frame shivering against the morning chill. Life in the Apache lands had always been full of challenges, but the sisters were used to surviving on their own. Their parents had passed away when they were very young, leaving them to rely on each other and the small band of Apache families who sometimes moved through the region. They learned to track animals for food, find water in hidden streams, and read the signs of the desert that told them when danger was near. Each day was a lesson in courage, patience, and resilience. But on this particular morning, the desert felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, a heaviness that made the sisters uneasy. Ahuli noticed it first, a subtle shift in the wind that carried a faint, metallic scent. She frowned, her instincts telling her that something was wrong. "Stay close," she whispered to her sisters, her voice low but firm. Nakamis sat up straighter, her eyes wide, sensing the seriousness in Ahuli's tone, while Mika clutched a small piece of cloth to her chest, a token of comfort she carried everywhere. Before they could gather their belongings, a group of men appeared on the ridge above the clearing. They were strangers, and the way they moved was deliberate, controlled, as if they had been watching the sisters for days. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust, and the sun glinted off the metal of their tools and weapons. Ahuli's heart pounded in her chest. She knew immediately who they were: traders, people who dealt in the dark and cruel business of capturing children to sell them far away. The sisters froze, unsure whether to run or hide. Ahuli made a quick decision, grabbing Mika's hand and pulling her toward the edge of the clearing. "We have to move now," she urged. Nakamis hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the strangers, but the fear in her sister's eyes drove her forward. They darted behind a cluster of rocks, hoping the men had not noticed them yet. But it was too late. The traders were fast and well prepared. They spread out, surrounding the area, cutting off escape routes. One of the men shouted something in a harsh voice, the words unfamiliar but full of menace. Ahuli tried to keep calm, whispering reassurances to her sisters, even as her own fear grew. The sisters huddled together, hearts racing, listening to the sound of horses' hooves growing closer, the faint jingling of harnesses and saddles, and the sharp commands of the men. Mika whimpered quietly, and Ahuli felt a surge of protectiveness. She looked around desperately for a way to escape, scanning the rugged terrain for any opening, any narrow path that could lead them to safety. But the traders had come prepared. There was no easy path out. Ahuli's mind raced as she weighed their options. Fighting them was impossible. They were outnumbered and unarmed. Running blindly could lead them straight into more danger. She needed a plan, something to buy them time, something that might keep them together. The traders were closing in now, their voices louder, more confident. One of them laughed cruelly, pointing toward the sisters' hiding spot. "Come on out, little ones," he called. "No use hiding. You'll be safer with us." The words sent a chill down Ahuli's spine, but she refused to show fear. She stood up slightly, keeping herself partially hidden behind a rock, and tried to speak calmly. "We don't want any trouble," she said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Please leave us alone." The men only laughed, their laughter harsh and unkind. They moved closer, ropes in hand, ready to grab the sisters. Ahuli's heart sank. They were caught, and she knew there was no way to talk their way out of this. In a sudden moment of desperation, she grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it toward the nearest man, startling him for a brief second. That moment was all the sisters had to try and slip past him, but the men reacted quickly, and before they could move, they were surrounded. The traders were not gentle. They grabbed the sisters roughly, pulling them off their feet. Ahuli struggled, but there were too many hands. Nakamis cried out, and Mika's small body shook with fear. The sisters clung to each other as best they could, their minds racing with terror and disbelief. How could this be happening? They had survived so much in the harsh desert, but they were no match for the cruelty of men who saw them only as objects to be sold. As they were forced toward the horses, Ahuli noticed the sadness in her sister's eyes, the way they looked at each other as if saying goodbye to the life they knew. Her heart ached. She wanted to be strong to protect them, but she felt powerless. The traders tied their hands and led them to the horses, speaking among themselves about the price they would fetch. The sisters' world had changed in an instant, from the freedom of the desert to the captivity of those who sought to profit from their suffering. The ride was rough and exhausting. The sisters were crammed together on the horses, their hands still bound, their faces streaked with dust and tears. They were silent, each lost in her own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. Ahuli kept looking at the horizon, hoping to see a sign of help, but there was none. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, unforgiving and vast. Hours passed, and the sisters began to realize the enormity of their situation. They were no longer in the familiar lands they had known, no longer surrounded by the protective presence of other Apache families. The traders were talking about markets, auctions, and buyers in towns far away, places the sisters had only heard of in stories. The reality hit them hard. They were being taken to a place where no one would know them, where they would be treated as property rather than as children with dreams and feelings. Despite the fear, Ahuli refused to give up hope. She whispered to her sisters, reminding them that they were strong, that they had survived the desert before, and that somehow they would survive this too. Nakamis clung to her words, drawing courage from her sister's determination. Mika, though scared, listened quietly, absorbing the strength that Ahuli tried to radiate. The bond between the sisters was unbreakable, even in the face of overwhelming danger. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren land, the traders continued their journey. They spoke carelessly about profits, completely unaware of the human lives they were disrupting. But the sisters had learned to observe, to listen, and to understand the intentions of others. They knew that survival required patience, courage, and the smallest opportunities. Every glance, every movement, every moment of distraction could be the difference between hope and despair. By evening, the group stopped near a small outcrop of rocks, setting up a temporary camp. The sisters were exhausted, their bodies aching from the ride and their hands sore from the ropes. They huddled together under a thin blanket, shivering in the cold desert night. The stars above seemed distant and indifferent, but Ahuli found some comfort in their steady light. She whispered stories of the Apache ancestors, tales of strength, wisdom, and courage, hoping to soothe her sister's fears. Nakamis listened intently, while Mika clung to every word, imagining the heroes of the stories watching over them. Despite the terror of the day, a tiny spark of hope remained. Ahuli reminded herself that the desert had taught them resilience, that they had faced challenges before and survived. She vowed silently that she would not let this be the end of their story. Somehow they would find a way to escape, to be free again. For now, all they could do was endure, stay together, and watch for the smallest chance to turn their fate around. The night grew darker, and the desert quieted except for the soft sound of the wind and the occasional grunt of the horses. The sisters clung to each other, trying to stay warm and safe, their minds filled with fear and uncertainty, but also with the faint glimmer of determination. The first part of their ordeal had ended, but the real challenge was only beginning. Somewhere ahead, danger and hope awaited in equal measure, and the sisters knew that courage would be their only companion on the long, uncertain path that lay ahead. The morning light broke over the desert in soft shades of gold and pink, casting long shadows across the dry, cracked earth. The Apache sisters awoke with stiff bodies and sore limbs, the ropes that bound their hands cutting into their skin. Their eyes, still heavy with sleep, darted around nervously as they realized that the men who had captured them were already awake and preparing for the next stage of their journey. The air was thick with tension, and the sisters could sense that the traders were eager to move quickly. Ahuli, the eldest, was the first to stir. She shook her sisters gently. "We need to stay quiet and alert," she whispered. "They are dangerous, but we must watch everything they do." Nakamis and Mika nodded, their fear tempered by the quiet strength of Ahuli's voice. They had survived in the harsh desert before, and while this situation was far more terrifying, they relied on each other's courage to endure it. The traders began to pack their few belongings onto the horses, speaking to one another in harsh tones that made the sisters flinch. Their conversation was all about profit, how much each captive could fetch, who would buy them, and how to transport them safely without losing their cargo. The sisters' stomachs churned as they realized that the traders thought of them as objects rather than as children with feelings, hopes, and dreams. Ahuli clenched her jaw to stop herself from shouting at them, knowing that any sign of resistance could provoke the men to greater cruelty. They rode through narrow valleys and over rocky hills, the desert stretching endlessly around them. The wind carried sand into their eyes and mouths, making it hard to see or breathe at times. Mika, the youngest, shivered in fear and exhaustion, leaning on Ahuli for comfort. Nakamis, though frightened, tried to remain calm, following her sister's example. Ahuli kept her gaze forward, scanning the horizon for any chance of escape, any small opening that might allow them to flee. But the traders were careful, vigilant, and cruelly determined, leaving little room for hope. By midday, the traders stopped near a small settlement on the edge of the desert. It was a place where the townspeople were accustomed to buying and selling animals, goods, and tragically, sometimes even humans. The market was crowded, noisy, and chaotic, filled with the cries of animals and the harsh voices of merchants. The sisters were forced off their horses and led through the dusty streets, their hands still bound. Their hearts pounded as they saw the signs hanging above shops and stalls, advertising livestock and other wares. The sisters could not believe what they were witnessing, people being sold like cattle, just as the traders had spoken. Ahuli's mind raced. She had heard stories of such markets before, whispered among the Apache families who traveled through the region. But seeing it with her own eyes, feeling the fear and helplessness in the air, was far worse than anything she had imagined. She held her sisters close, whispering, "Stay together. Don't let them separate us. We have to watch and wait for the right moment." Nakamis and Mika nodded silently, clinging to each other as if their combined strength could shield them from the cruelty surrounding them. The traders led the sisters to a small enclosure at the edge of the market. Other captives, children and teenagers, were already there, their faces pale with fear and confusion. The sisters were forced to sit on the ground, the heat of the sun beating down on them, their hands still tied. The traders continued their preparations, moving among the captives with calculating eyes, measuring them, examining them, and discussing their value. Every word, every gesture, was a reminder that the sisters were being treated as property rather than human beings. Mika began to tremble violently, and Nakamis put her arm around her younger sister, trying to soothe her. Ahuli, meanwhile, kept her head high, determined not to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She studied the traders carefully, noting their routines, the way they interacted with each other and the captives. She knew that survival depended on careful observation and patience. Any small misstep could cost them dearly, but she also knew that there might be someone, somewhere, who could help them if they were patient and clever enough to find them. The hours passed slowly, each one filled with tension. The market continued its noisy business, with merchants shouting about prices, animals braying, and townspeople moving through the streets. The sisters remained huddled together, whispering softly to keep each other calm. They shared memories of their life in the Apache lands, stories of their parents, and lessons they had learned from the desert. These small memories were like lifelines, grounding them in the midst of the chaos and cruelty surrounding them. One of the traders, a tall man with a harsh voice and sharp eyes, approached the sisters. He examined them carefully, speaking to another trader about how much they might be worth. His hands were rough as they touched their shoulders, and his eyes were cold, calculating. Ahulai's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. She whispered to her sisters, "We must be patient, we cannot show fear. If we stay strong, we may find someone who will help us." Nakamis nodded, biting her lip to hold back tears, while Mika clutched the cloth she carried for comfort. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the market seemed to grow even more chaotic. More people arrived, bringing animals, goods, and curiosity. The traders moved the captives around, showing them to potential buyers. The sisters could feel the eyes of strangers on them, some filled with curiosity, some with greed. It was a humiliating and frightening experience, and the sisters held tightly to each other for support. Ahulai's mind worked quickly, trying to find patterns in the movements of the traders, looking for any moment when their attention might be distracted. Then, amidst the chaos, a figure appeared at the edge of the market who seemed different from the others. He was a rancher, dressed in practical clothing and carrying a calm, confident presence. He moved through the crowd with purpose, observing the traders and the captives without a hint of fear. His eyes settled on the sisters, taking in the fear, exhaustion, and dignity that still clung to them despite the cruelty they had faced. Ahulai noticed him too, sensing a quiet strength in his presence. She whispered to her sisters, "Look, there might be hope." The rancher approached the traders, speaking to them in a firm but measured tone. His voice carried authority, and there was no mistaking the confidence behind his words. The traders responded with scoffs and dismissive laughter, not taking him seriously at first. But he did not back down. He pointed out the injustice of what they were doing, reminding them that the sisters were human beings, not property. His words were strong and clear, a stark contrast to the greed and cruelty of the traders. The sisters watched in awe and disbelief. This man, a stranger who had just arrived, was standing up to the people who had captured them and treated them like animals. Ahulai felt a surge of hope, a small spark of courage that had not been extinguished despite the horrors of the day. She whispered to her sisters, "He might help us, we have to trust him." Nakamis and Mika nodded, their eyes wide with cautious hope. The traders hesitated, sensing the determination in the rancher's stance. He did not threaten them with violence, but his presence and his words carried a weight they could not ignore. The sisters could feel the tension in the air, the fragile balance between fear and hope, cruelty and justice. For the first time since being captured, they felt that perhaps there was a chance to escape the nightmare that had begun in the desert that morning. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the dusty market, the rancher continued to negotiate with the traders. He spoke firmly about taking the sisters into his care, promising safety and protection. The traders were reluctant at first, but the rancher's persistence and the clear sense of justice in his voice eventually won the day. The sisters were still tied and fearful, but they could see the possibility of freedom. The sisters were led to the rancher's horses, their hands still bound, but their hearts filled with cautious hope. The ride to the ranch was quiet, each sister lost in her thoughts. Ahulai kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning for any signs of danger, while Nakamis tried to calm Mika, who was still trembling from the day's terror. Despite the fear, there was a growing sense of relief. They were being taken away from the cruelty of the market, away from the traders who had sought to treat them as property. As night fell, the desert air cooled, and the sisters finally allowed themselves a moment to rest. They huddled together on the horses, feeling the steady rhythm of the rancher's horse beneath them. It was a strange comfort, the sense that someone was truly watching over them, someone who cared about their safety. Ahuli whispered quietly, "We are not free yet, but we are closer. We must stay strong and trust that he will protect us." Nakamis and Mika nodded, their eyes heavy with exhaustion but bright with hope. The journey had been long and frightening, but the first glimmers of rescue had appeared. The sisters had survived the desert, endured capture, and witnessed cruelty beyond their understanding. Now, with the rancher guiding them, they held on to the fragile hope that their lives could be changed forever. The night stretched on, filled with the quiet sounds of the desert, and the sisters, though still fearful, allowed themselves to imagine a future where they might be safe, cared for, and free from the traders' cruel intentions. The morning sun rose slowly over the dusty market town, casting long, warm rays over the wooden stalls and narrow streets. The Apache sisters sat quietly on the rancher's horses, their hands still bound, but their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and cautious hope. They had survived the first night under his care, and while they were not yet free from danger, the presence of someone willing to protect them brought a strange comfort they had not felt in days. Ahuli, as always, kept her eyes alert, scanning the crowd, listening for the slightest hint of trouble. The rancher, a tall, strong man named Samuel, moved confidently through the market, his gaze never leaving the traders who had captured the sisters. Samuel had heard rumors about the capture of the girls, and when he arrived at the market, he saw the injustice for himself. His heart burned with anger at the cruelty, but he remained calm and careful. He knew that rash action could endanger the sisters even more. His first goal was to negotiate their release, to convince the traders that these girls were not their property to sell. Samuel approached the men cautiously, yet with a firm presence that commanded attention. The traders sneered at him, mocking his concern and daring him to challenge them. "Mind your own business, stranger," one of them spat. "These girls are our property now. We decide what to do with them." But Samuel did not flinch. His voice was steady and calm, yet carried the weight of determination. "They are not property," he said. "They are children and they deserve protection. I will not allow you to harm them." The traders laughed, a cruel and hollow sound that made the sisters shrink back on their horses. They had expected the world to be harsh, but seeing someone stand up to their captors gave them hope they did not know they could feel. Ahuli gripped her sister's hands, silently urging them to be patient and brave. She knew that this man might be their only chance at safety. Samuel's negotiation did not happen all at once. He spoke firmly, pointing out the danger and wrongness of what the traders were doing. He offered to pay a fair price for their release if necessary, but he made it clear that he would not allow the girls to be sold to anyone who would mistreat them. The traders hesitated. They were greedy, yes, but they were also cautious. Samuel's presence was not threatening in a violent way, yet it carried a force that they could not ignore. Slowly, a discussion began among them, their voices tense and uncertain. While the traders argued, the sisters watched from their horses. Mika clung to Ahuli, trembling slightly, while Nakamis tried to mask her fear with a brave expression. They whispered to each other, imagining what freedom might feel like, daring to hope that someone had finally come to rescue them. Ahuli's mind was sharp and alert, analyzing every movement of the traders and Samuel. She knew that even now, danger could strike at any moment. They had to stay together, stay quiet, and trust that Samuel's courage would be enough. Samuel realized that words alone might not convince the traders. He remained calm, but he made his next move carefully. He stepped closer, his gaze steady, his voice still firm. "These girls belong to no one but themselves," he said. "I will take them with me, and if you try to stop me, the law will hold you accountable." The traders laughed at him again, but there was a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Samuel's confidence was unusual. They were not used to being challenged with such certainty. Ahuli could feel her pulse racing as she listened. She did not understand everything Samuel said, but she understood his intent. He was not like the others. He was strong, brave, and willing to fight for them. Her sisters sensed it too, and for the first time in days, a sense of hope began to grow in their hearts. They clung to each other, whispering quietly, imagining a future where they might be safe and free. The standoff continued for what felt like hours. Samuel remained patient, refusing to be intimidated by the traders, threats, and mocking laughter. He explained that the girls were not for sale in the cruel way the traders intended, and that anyone who tried to take them forcibly would face serious consequences. His words were precise, and his calm determination was like a shield around the sisters, protecting them from the traders' cruelty. Eventually, one of the traders, a rough man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. He tried to intimidate Samuel, raising his voice and gesturing aggressively. But Samuel did not step back. He held his ground, speaking firmly about justice and compassion. The other traders exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that Samuel's confidence was not empty. He was not just a stranger. He was a man who would not allow wrongdoing to go unchallenged. Ahuli's heart leapt when she saw the traders begin to hesitate. It was the first sign that Samuel might succeed. She whispered to her sisters, "Be ready. Soon we will be free." Nakamis and Mika clung to her words, drawing courage from her calm voice. The sisters had endured fear and danger, but now, with Samuel standing up to the traders, they felt a new kind of strength, a belief that someone outside their family could care for them and protect them. Samuel made his final move carefully. He offered to take the girls away immediately, warning the traders that any attempt to interfere would have consequences. The traders, finally realizing that Samuel would not back down, reluctantly agreed. There were angry murmurs and grumbles, but the girls' fate was sealed. They would be freed from the market and the traders' cruel plans. As the sisters were untied from their restraints, relief washed over them. Mika's small body shook with emotion, while Nakamis' eyes welled with tears she could not hold back. Ahuli remained strong, but even she could not hide the weight lifting from her shoulders. The sisters were finally free from the immediate threat of the traders, and Samuel had kept his promise to protect them. The journey back to Samuel's ranch was quiet at first, each sister lost in her thoughts. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but now it felt different, not threatening but full of possibility. Samuel rode beside them, offering comfort and guidance, speaking softly to reassure them that they were safe. The sisters listened, their hearts filling with gratitude for the man who had risked so much to save them. Along the way, Samuel explained that the world was not always fair, and that there were people who would seek to exploit the weak. But he also reminded them that there were those who would stand up for what was right, who would fight for justice and kindness. The sisters absorbed every word, realizing that courage could come from unexpected places, and that hope was never truly lost if someone believed in it. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the desert. The sisters could see the ranch in the distance, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by open fields and rolling hills. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to imagine what life might be like in safety. They whispered quietly to each other, imagining warm beds, full meals, and the freedom to live without fear. The idea was almost too wonderful to believe, yet it filled them with a quiet joy they had not felt in a long time. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the stars were beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Samuel helped the sisters down from the horses, guiding them gently toward the house. The ranch was simple but welcoming, a place where they could rest, eat, and begin to recover from the horrors they had endured. The sisters felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They were finally out of the traders' control, finally in a place where they could begin to heal. That night, as they settled into the small room Samuel had prepared for them, Ahuli whispered to her sisters, "We are not just survivors. We are safe now. And soon we will learn to live again." Nakamis nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face, while Mika hugged her sister tightly, whispering words of thanks to the man who had rescued them. They had endured fear, cruelty, and uncertainty, but they had found hope in the courage of a stranger who chose to stand up for what was right. The sisters drifted off to sleep, exhausted but comforted. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward a new life. They had learned that even in the darkest moments, there could be light, that kindness and courage could appear in unexpected forms, and that they were never truly alone as long as they held onto each other. Samuel, watching over them as they slept, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He knew that protecting the sisters was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, days filled with learning, healing, and helping the girls adapt to a new way of life, but he was ready to face them. And he knew that with patience, guidance, and love, the sisters could thrive and grow, their spirits no longer confined by the cruelty of those who had once sought to harm them. In the quiet of the desert night, the sisters slept peacefully for the first time in days. They had survived the market, endured the fear of capture, and been rescued by someone who believed in justice and compassion. And though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, they had found a safe place to begin again, a place where hope could grow and courage could flourish. The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting a gentle glow over the desert and the distant ranch. The Apache sisters awoke to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the soft clucking of hens, and the distant crow of a rooster. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and danger they had endured at the market. Their muscles ached from the journey, their minds still buzzing with the memory of capture and rescue. Yet, for the first time in days, there was a sense of safety surrounding them, a feeling they had not known for so long. Ahuli stirred first, as she always did, and gently shook her sisters awake. "Today, we start learning how to live here," she said softly. "We are safe, but we must be careful. Things will be different and we must adapt." Nakamis and Mika nodded, their eyes wide with both fear and excitement. The youngest sister, Mika, clung tightly to Ahuli, not yet ready to fully trust that the danger was truly behind them. But the warmth of the ranch, the calmness of Samuel, and the absence of the traders gave her hope that perhaps, for the first time, she could feel safe. Samuel appeared soon after, carrying baskets of fresh bread, fruit, and water. He moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes filled with care as he looked at the sisters. "Breakfast," he said gently, placing the baskets on the table. "Eat. You have a long day ahead and you need your strength." The sisters hesitated at first, unsure if they could trust food after the days of fear and hunger. But hunger won over caution, and soon they were nibbling at the bread, their bodies grateful for the nourishment. After breakfast, Samuel led the sisters outside to the ranch's open fields. He wanted to teach them about life on the ranch, about animals, work, and the routines that would help them feel grounded. Ahuli observed carefully, taking in the movements of the ranch hands, the way the horses were fed, the way the cows were guided to pasture. Nakamis and Mika followed her example, though their steps were uncertain at first. Samuel spoke patiently, showing them how to hold a rope, how to approach a horse gently, and how to understand the animal's moods. The sisters listened attentively, aware that this was not just work, it was a chance to regain control over their lives. Despite the peace and safety, memories of the traders haunted the sisters. Ahuli often found herself looking over her shoulder, expecting danger to appear at any moment. The memory of their capture, the fear, and the cruelty lingered in her mind like a shadow. But Samuel never rushed them or dismissed their fears. He encouraged them to talk, to ask questions, and to express their feelings. Slowly, the sisters began to share their memories, their sorrow, and their anger. Speaking helped to lift some of the weight from their hearts. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high, Samuel took the sisters to the edge of the property where a small creek ran. The water was cool and clear, a refreshing change from the harsh desert they had known. "You must learn to be comfortable with the land, with the water, and with yourselves," Samuel said. "The desert taught you to survive, and this land will teach you to live." Ahuli knelt by the creek, letting the water run over her hands, feeling the life in it. Nakamis and Mika followed, splashing gently, laughing softly for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The laughter was fragile, hesitant, but it was real, a sign that healing had begun. Yet even as they learned, dangers from the past were never far from their minds. Samuel remained vigilant, ensuring that the sisters were always safe. He spoke to them about the importance of awareness, of understanding people's intentions, and of protecting themselves. He told them stories of the Apache ancestors, tales of courage, resilience, and wisdom, helping them to connect with their roots even in this new environment. The sisters listened eagerly, absorbing every word, finding strength in the stories that reminded them of who they were and what they could endure. One evening, while the sisters were resting in the small sitting area of the ranch, Samuel received news from a neighboring town. Rumors had reached him that some traders were searching for the sisters, angry that they had lost their property. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. He knew that fear would not help, careful planning would. He explained to the sisters that there might be people who would come looking for them, and that they must always remain vigilant, yet not let fear dominate their lives. Ahuli and Nakamis nodded, understanding the seriousness of the warning. Mika held onto Ahuli tightly, her small hands trembling slightly. Over the following days, Samuel worked with the sisters to prepare them for any potential threat. He taught them how to move quietly, how to observe their surroundings, and how to communicate silently when necessary. He showed them how to recognize the signs of danger in the land and how to stay together in difficult situations. Each lesson was a step toward independence, helping the sisters reclaim some of the strength and confidence that the traders had tried to strip from them. Despite the need for caution, life at the ranch was beginning to bring joy. The sisters discovered small pleasures in the daily routine, brushing the horses, gathering eggs from the coop, and tending to a small garden. They learned to cook simple meals, sharing laughter and stories as they worked. For the first time in days, they felt that the world could be kind, that people could care, and that life could have moments of peace and happiness even after trauma. One day, as they walked through the fields, Ahuli noticed a distant figure moving along the horizon. Her heart tightened, fear rising sharply. Could it be the traders? She signaled to Samuel, who quickly assessed the situation, but it was not a threat. It was a traveler passing through the ranch. Samuel explained to the sisters that the world held both danger and safety, and that learning to distinguish between the two was a vital skill. The sisters listened carefully, understanding that vigilance was part of their survival, but it need not rob them of the chance to enjoy life. As the days turned into weeks, the sisters grew stronger, more confident, and more connected to the land around them. Samuel continued to teach, guide, and protect them, helping them to reclaim their childhood in small, careful steps. They learned the rhythms of the ranch, the habits of the animals, and the ways of the land. They laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and allowed themselves to dream again. Ahuli often reflected on how far they had come, from the fear and cruelty of the market to the safety and hope of the ranch. But healing was not a straight path. Some nights, memories of the traders returned, haunting the sisters' dreams. They would wake in fear, trembling until Samuel or each other comforted them. Ahuli often stayed awake with Micah and Nakamis, holding them close, whispering reassurances, and reminding them that they were safe now. The sisters were learning to face their fears, to recognize that while danger existed, they had people who would stand by them and protect them. Through all this, the bond between the sisters strengthened even more. They had endured fear, cruelty, and uncertainty together, and now they faced a new challenge, learning to trust, to heal, and to live in safety. Ahuli took her role as protector seriously, guiding her sisters while also allowing herself to feel the relief and hope that Samuel had brought into their lives. Nakamis learned to share responsibility, helping both sisters when she could, while Micah began to find courage in small steps, learning that the world could be kind. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of red and gold, the sisters sat on a hill overlooking the ranch. Samuel joined them, speaking softly about life, courage, and the importance of hope. "You have survived the worst," he said. "Now it is time to live, to find joy, to grow strong in ways you never imagined." The sisters listened, their hearts swelling with gratitude. They had endured so much, yet here they were, alive together and beginning a new chapter. The desert night settled over the ranch, calm and serene. The sisters slept peacefully, no longer haunted by the immediate fear of capture. Samuel kept watch, ensuring their safety, knowing that trust would take time, but that patience and care could heal even the deepest wounds. The journey from fear to freedom had been long and difficult, but the sisters were finally beginning to experience the sense of security and belonging they had longed for. By the next morning, the sisters had grown stronger and more confident. They moved through the ranch with purpose, learning, laughing, and embracing the simple joys of life. Samuel watched them with quiet pride, knowing that the process of healing was ongoing, but that the girls were resilient beyond measure. They had endured capture, cruelty, and fear, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. The sisters had not yet fully left behind the shadows of their past, but they were learning that life could hold safety, kindness, and new beginnings. Together, with Samuel's guidance and their own courage, they were reclaiming the freedom and happiness that had been stolen from them. Each day brought new lessons, new victories, and new moments of joy, proving that even after the darkest nights, the dawn could bring light, hope, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, bathing the fields in a golden glow that promised a new beginning. The Apache sisters woke early, as they had grown accustomed to on the ranch, but this morning felt different. The air was calm and peaceful, and for the first time in many days there was no tension, no fear of capture, and no uncertainty pressing on their hearts. Ahuli stretched her arms, feeling a quiet strength she had never felt before, and looked at her sisters, who were also waking with soft smiles on their faces. Nakamis yawned, rubbing her eyes, while Micah stretched and blinked at the bright light, feeling more secure than she had in weeks. Life at the ranch had become their new normal. Each day began with chores, but they were not just chores. They were lessons in responsibility, teamwork, and trust. Samuel moved among them patiently, guiding their hands as they learned to care for the animals, the garden, and the property. He had taught them how to feed the horses, milk the cows, gather eggs, and even tend to small injuries that the animals might get. The sisters listened and learned eagerly, their minds absorbing each new skill like a sponge. They were growing stronger, more confident, and more independent with every passing day. Ahuli had become not just the protector of her sisters, but also a bridge between them and Samuel. She was careful to follow his guidance, but she also felt a growing sense of authority and capability. She watched her sisters, making sure they were safe and helping them when needed, and she began to realize that strength did not mean being fearless. It meant being courageous even when you were afraid. Nakamis and Mika looked to Ahuli for guidance, but they also began to show signs of their own strength. Nakamis developed patience and wisdom, learning to anticipate problems and solve them calmly, while Mika, the youngest, found courage in small steps, trusting herself more each day. The days passed, blending work, learning, and small moments of joy. The sisters laughed together, shared stories, and discovered that even after fear and cruelty, the world could hold happiness. Samuel encouraged this, reminding them that while the past could teach lessons, it did not define them. "You have survived much," he said one afternoon as they rested in the shade of a large oak tree. "But now it is time to live, to find joy, and to grow strong. Life is not just survival, it is about hope, courage, and kindness." The sisters listened intently, letting his words sink into their hearts. The ranch had become more than a place of safety, it was a home. Each corner held memories of their first days there, of the gentle guidance and protection Samuel offered. They had learned to trust again, not blindly, but with careful observation and confidence in the man who had saved them. Samuel had taught them to watch the world, to understand people's intentions, and to respond with courage and wisdom. The sisters began to understand that the world was not all cruel, that there were people willing to stand up for what was right, and that trust, once carefully placed, could bring safety and joy. One morning, as they walked through the fields tending to the horses, Ahuli paused and looked at the horizon. She thought of the desert, of the harsh land where they had once lived freely but under constant threat, and of the traders who had sought to take them. A shiver ran down her spine at the memory, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of gratitude and determination. They had survived, not only through luck but through courage, quick thinking, and the kindness of someone willing to stand up for what was right. She whispered to her sisters, "We have come so far, we are stronger than we ever imagined." Nakamis smiled softly, nodding. "We have each other," she said, "and we have Samuel. We are safe now and we can begin again." Mika, still small and often shy, looked up at her sisters with bright eyes and said, "I feel like I can do anything now. I'm not afraid." Ahuli reached out and took her hand, feeling a warmth and pride that made her heart swell. They had endured fear, cruelty, and uncertainty, yet here they were, alive together and ready to embrace a new life. As the weeks turned into months, the sisters became an integral part of the ranch. They learned to care for the animals with confidence, tended the garden with skill, and even helped Samuel with tasks around the property. The animals responded to them with calmness and trust, reflecting the care and patience the sisters had developed. Their laughter and chatter filled the ranch, blending with the sounds of the wind, the animals, and the gentle creak of the wooden buildings. Life was simple, yet it was full of meaning, and the sisters began to feel a sense of purpose they had never experienced before. Samuel continued to guide them, offering lessons not only in ranch life but in life itself. He taught them about respect, compassion, and the importance of helping others. "Courage is not just about facing danger," he said one evening as they gathered by the fire. "It is about doing what is right, protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and having hope even when the world seems dark." The sisters absorbed his words, understanding that their journey had not only been about survival, but about learning the values that would carry them through life. Despite the peace of the ranch, the sisters never forgot the dangers they had faced. Ahuli often spoke to her sisters about the importance of remembering their experiences, not to dwell on fear, but to learn and grow from them. They discussed how the traders had underestimated them, how courage and kindness had changed their fate, and how hope could be a guiding light even in the darkest moments. These conversations strengthened their bond, giving them the tools to face any future challenge with confidence. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, a traveler passed by the ranch. The sisters watched as he looked around, curious about the farm and the people living there. Samuel approached him calmly, explaining who the sisters were and how they had come to live at the ranch. The traveler listened, clearly moved by their story, and expressed admiration for Samuel's courage and the sisters' resilience. Ahulai, Nakamis, and Mika listened quietly, realizing that the world could also hold kindness and respect, not just fear and cruelty. As the seasons changed, the sisters grew more confident and independent. They explored the hills, learned the rhythms of the land, and even helped Samuel with larger tasks around the ranch. Their laughter became a constant part of the property, echoing through the fields and reminding everyone that joy could flourish even after hardship. Ahulai had grown into a leader among her sisters, guiding and protecting them while also embracing the new opportunities that life offered. Nakamis had become wise and patient, able to solve problems calmly and thoughtfully, and Mika had found courage and confidence that had been hidden behind her initial shyness. The ranch had become a place of healing, growth, and freedom. The sisters no longer lived in fear, but in a world where they could learn, play, and grow. Samuel's guidance had given them the tools to navigate life safely, but it was their own courage, resilience, and bond as sisters that allowed them to truly thrive. They had survived cruelty, captivity, and fear, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the sisters sat together on a small hill overlooking the ranch. Samuel joined them and they watched the sky in quiet contemplation. Ahulai spoke first, her voice calm but full of emotion. "We have been through so much, but now we are safe. We have each other and we have a home." Nakamis nodded, adding, "We have learned so much about courage, patience, and hope. We can face anything now." Mika, with a small smile, whispered, "I am not afraid anymore. I feel strong and I feel happy." Samuel looked at them with pride, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the sunset. "You have survived the worst," he said gently. "And now you have the chance to live fully, to grow, to laugh, and to be happy. The world is wide and life holds many lessons and joys. Never forget your strength and always protect those who need help." The sisters absorbed his words, feeling a sense of peace and gratitude that filled their hearts completely. As night fell, the sisters returned to the house, tired but content. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that they were capable, resilient, and loved. The ranch had become their sanctuary, a place where courage, kindness, and hope could grow alongside them. Ahulai, Nakamis, and Mika slept soundly that night, no longer haunted by fear, knowing that they had the strength to face the world and the support of someone who truly cared. The journey from the harsh desert to the dangerous market, and finally to the safety of the ranch, had been long and difficult. But the sisters had endured, and they had learned that courage, love, and hope could change their lives forever. They had survived the cruelty of the traders, and now they could embrace a new life filled with possibility, freedom, and happiness. Their story was one of resilience, of bravery, and of the power of kindness to heal even the deepest wounds. In the days and years that followed, the sisters grew into confident, capable young women. They remembered their past, but it no longer held them captive. They laughed, played, worked, and dreamed, surrounded by the safety of the ranch and the guidance of Samuel. They had been through fear and darkness, but they had found light, hope, and a sense of belonging that could never be taken away. Together, they faced the world with courage, strength, and gratitude, knowing that they had survived the worst and had been given a chance to thrive in a world that could now be kind and full of opportunity. The story of the Apache sisters and the rancher who stood up to injustice became a quiet legend in the region. It was a story of courage, compassion, and resilience. And for the sisters, it was a story of life, hard, dangerous, and cruel at times, but ultimately full of hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future.